Welcome, friends. My name is Frances Kramer. I'm the Director of Education here at Pendle Hill, and it is my great joy and pleasure to introduce our November 2025 First Monday lecture. Here we stand on Lenape land, what is now known as Wallingford, Pennsylvania, and we have been doing this learning together here since 1930. Many of you celebrated our 95th anniversary with us in September, and we were called to rejoice and to feel the blessing that we are still here 95 years later in this experiment in spiritual learning community that deepens and grows every day. Welcome back to those who are returning, and a particularly warm welcome to any of you who are new to us tonight. Thank you for being here. You make us who we are. Before I say a little more about our program, I wanted to give a few brief tech details. I'm joined tonight here in the barn by Pendle Hill staff and guests, including Maddie and our scholar David, who are helping the tech in the back. Thank you so much. If you have any technical difficulties or questions, please message tech support and they'll do their best to support you. You may have noticed that we are live streaming to YouTube. Our channel is Pendle Hill USA. Only those speaking will be live streamed. In the coming days, we will send out a link to the recording along with resources from tonight. If you're here and you didn't register, please talk to me afterwards, or you can go to our website to register belatedly so you can make sure to get our email with the resources and the recording. We've enabled live transcription, so you're able to access closed captioning. At the end of the lecture, we'll have an opportunity for Eileen to receive some questions that she will facilitate. We are deeply grateful to the Friends Foundation for the Aging, whose support to Pendle Hill allows us to continue making these First Monday lecture series and our other free online offerings accessible to friends of all ages. In the email that you'll receive, there will be a lot of other opportunities to continue to learn with us. And friends here in the barn, please check out the flyers outside with all of our upcoming programs. Don't want to take more time before introducing our speaker for tonight. Eileen Flanagan came to Pendle Hill as a resident student in 1992 to discern if she was a Quaker and a writer. 33 years later, she carries a minute of religious service from Chestnut Hill Meeting and is the award-winning author of 4 books and scores of articles. She has served as both board clerk and campaign director of Earth Quaker Action Team and has trained people across the United States in nonviolent strategies for change. The former trainings coordinator of Choose Democracy, she has worked with Daniel Hunter to create online trainings and a peacekeeper workbook to support tens of thousands of people resisting authoritarianism today. Her newest book, Common Ground: How the Crisis of the Earth is Saving Us from Our Illusion of Separation, offers lessons not only for those concerned about climate change, but for all those who want to work for a better world. You can learn more at eileenflanagan.com. I'll also pass around during the Q&A sign up if you want to get on Eileen's newsletter, and I'll open the bookstore at the end of our evening if you didn't get a chance yet to buy Eileen's book. Before passing it on, I just wanted to say about half the time I see Eileen, it's in this room or on this campus, and the other half of the time is at demonstrations in the streets. Eileen's often there as a peacekeeper. And every time I see you, Eileen, whether it's here or there, I feel more courageous and more clear about what I'm doing. And I'm so excited to learn from you tonight. So with that, I will invite us all to settle back into waiting worship, and Eileen will speak to us from the silence.
you, Francis. I want to start by acknowledging how important this place is to me. As Francis said, I discerned two very big questions by coming here as a resident student in 1992. I also met my husband here. I met a lot of people who are pillars of my life here. And I think there was something about the trees and the campus and the worship room. I realized that the part of me that left the Catholic Church and wanted to just go be a pagan in the woods could live in Quakerism. And I also could come in on the bench and be with people too. As I was preparing for tonight, I was struck how many things I experienced at Pendle Hill that are connected to this book. There's a book that I discovered in the Pendle Hill bookstore just when I needed it that I cite here, and in some ways is the seed of this story, which I'll come back to. My favorite quote from Dr. King, I learned from Michael Gagne sitting outside of Burbank when we were co-facilitating with Matthew Armstead and Steve Chase, a program on faithfulness. Even the hard things, I lived here for 4 terms during the resident program, and one of those terms there was a big community conflict. And that came back to me as I was preparing, how much I learned about being in a community that is struggling, how much I learned about myself. I realized that I was raised to avoid conflict, and that is a challenge for someone who feels called to be an activist. I also watched people try and squelch the conflict and saw how that doesn't work. And other people who accelerated it, sometimes in ways that weren't helpful. I learned a lot from Bill Tabor, who I don't know how many people remember Bill Tabor, used in his messages in Meeting for Worship and in his teaching this wide variety of language from early friends about spirit. Because I had left the Catholic Church, I had this little ambivalence toward a lot of religious language that had different connotations for me. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to use the word God, because it sounded so, patriarchal or whatever. And Bill Tabor was deeply rooted in his Quaker faith from the conservative tradition. He used all this language about the inner seed and the inner teacher. And the light was just one of many metaphors that really opened up for me being able to talk about my spiritual experience without getting tripped up on the stuff I was moving away from. And that relates to the themes of this book too, being choiceful in the language we use with the intention of reaching people and not just being in our own rigid vocabulary. So I just felt very grateful preparing it. I wanted to start by naming a few of those things. Another thing I loved about the resident program was the inclusion of the arts and the understanding that the arts are part of our spiritual expression. And later realizing how much they are also part of activist expression and sort of a bridge between those two. In South Africa right now, there's a program going on led by the person who wrote the foreword to the book, Kumi Naidoo, and his wife Louisa Zondo are leading something called Artivism, which is exploring how the arts are integral. So this is all a long wind up to introducing Reverend Retta Morgan, who's gonna start us off with a song. And it's a different song than what we talked about, but it seems to fit, I think, as I think about Pendle Hill at its best as a place that helps prepare people for the work they feel called to do in the world. Sometimes it helps people heal from that world too. But for me, it's been a place of getting ready for these times in a lot of ways. So Retta, will you start with a song to prepare us to listen and to speak?
please get ready. Brothers, sisters, please get ready. Brothers, sisters, please get ready. For the time is drawing nigh. Hey, hey, hey. Oh, oh, there'll be signs and wonders. Oh, there'll be signs and wonders. Oh, there'll be signs and wonders. For the time is drawing nigh. Hey, 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 hey. We'll turn round and just start over. We'll turn round and just start over. We'll turn round and just start over. For the time is drawing nigh. Hey, hey, hey. I believe in being ready. I believe in being ready. I believe in being ready. For the time is drawing nigh. I know there's some really good singers in this room. Sing that chorus with me. Come on, let's go. I believe in being ready. I believe in being ready. I believe in being ready. For the time is drawing nigh. Maybe one more time. I believe in being ready. I believe in being ready. I believe in being ready. For the time is drawing nigh. For the time is drawing nigh. For the time is drawing nigh.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Greta. What was I thinking having her go first? I thought this did. No. I will start by just talking a little bit about the subtitle of this book. Common Ground, the title of this evening, is the main title, but the subtitle is a little peculiar. It says how the crisis of the earth is saving us from our illusion of separation. And I want to give you just a moment to reflect on what you think that means. When I started this project, I had one idea of what it meant, and lots of other versions came over the years. So just very briefly, if you can turn to a neighbor and share what you think, especially that phrase, the illusion of separation. What does that evoke in you? And the folks on Zoom, Maddie has kindly offered to scan your answers in the chat, and we're not going to be able to read all of them out loud, but just to give you also a chance to reflect without navigating a maze of Zoom rooms. We're glad you're here. So if you're on Zoom and you want to put something that comes to mind for the illusion of separation, and in this room in the barn, just turn to a neighbor real quickly. What do you think of the illusion of separation? What do those words bring on? Sorry, it's the illusion of separation. That's how you yeah. Now If one person that month was speaking, make sure your partner gets a chance. You can wrapping up your presentation. Oh, I love it when people understand. I love my candidate. No, I agree. No, it was okay, wrap it up. Fine, thank you. So I know that that was really quick and I love how everybody jumped right into it. I would just love to hear a few of the ideas that people talked about. Anybody wants to jump in first, and then I can repeat into the mic rather than trying to bring the cord around.
We were on the same wavelength around, it sounded rather Buddhistic,
Buddhistic.
yeah. And I
Okay.
thought of Joanna Macy, and we talked a lot about all the systems of oppression that want to make us think we're separate, but how clearly we're not.
Right, so systems of oppression want us to feel that we're separate, and Buddhists and like Joanna Macy is one, help to break that down and show our interconnection. Is that a fair summary? Great, in the background.
Polluted air doesn't know state boundaries.
It sure doesn't. Polluted air doesn't know state boundaries or county boundaries or city boundaries. And one of the people who speaks most about that is our friend Eileen Mayfield in Chester, Pennsylvania, who will be very quick to point out that the industrial waterfront pollution affects Wallingford and Media and the rest of Delaware County. Thank you. How about a few more?
I've done protests, gone to them forever, and I have always felt poorly used, except for the No Kings one that just happened. I wanted to be well used, so my sign said kin.
Yeah.
And I would take like 1 minute sermons and walk down the line and say, turn around, I'm giving you a quick lesson on what it means to belong to each other. And I felt so well used by the end of that day. You know, I said, on this very land, Indigenous people knew about kinship, kingdoms, kindred. They knew they belonged to each other and they knew they belonged to the earth. So
Great.
this really speaks to me.
Thank you. Thank you. How about on Zoom? Thank you, Maddie and David, for monitoring. You want to share a few from there?
Yeah, I'll share a few. One person said the illusion of separation is that we can possibly survive the climate crisis individually and separately. And the climate crisis teaches us that we're all small and vulnerable and equally vulnerable, so we are all connected. Because when we have a crisis, our natural instinct is to help the most vulnerable. And a lot around the theme, although we consider ourselves to be separate, we aren't. We are.
Thank you. I found that there were a lot of layers to this. And certainly I was already a climate activist by the time the idea for this book came along. So I was thinking about that. I was also thinking about pollution. One of the things I often say is that both of those problems are shared and unequal. So just as we're getting the polluted air from Chester, it doesn't mean we're getting the same dose as the people who live right next door to the oil refinery or the chemical plant or the Covanta incinerator, right? But I was noticing in the climate movement, the pendulum went from we're all in this together, we all live downstream, to only certain communities are affected. And neither one of them is the full truth. The full truth is that both are true. It's uneven, unequal, and shared. The inspiration for this book really came in a spiritual message down the road at Haverford College. Friends Council on Higher Education was having a conference, and Tribe One was the opening. They started with music too. Some of you know Neonu Span and other members of Tribe One. And in between the songs, Neonu had the group do a visioning exercise about what is our vision for living in right relationship. And the words that really came to me felt like the message and meaning for worship. And they were, it's not about us saving the earth. The earth will survive, whether we do or not. But the crisis of the earth is saving us from our illusion of separation. So that subtitle is kind of a thesis, but it's also a hope, a hope that felt like a spiritual leading. And I immediately in that conference thought of a few examples. I had just in 2013, that was 2014, in 2013, a bunch of us went to the Forward on Climate rally in DC. Earthquaker Action Team had gotten a bunch of buses, and there were all these remarkable speakers, but the one that really spoke to my heart was Chief Jackie Thomas, a First Nations elder in Canada. And she told the story about how her Indigenous community had partnered with local settlers, local ranchers, to stop a pipeline because they recognized that the pipeline threatened everybody's water. And in reference to the pipeline company, she said, I really have to thank Enbridge for bringing our communities together. And she got a laugh. And she said, this is the first time in my life I've seen white and Native people work together. And I was standing next to George Lakey, who some of you know, and his big white eyebrows went up, and it's the first time in her life she's seen white and Native people work together. That's remarkable. I had heard a very similar story in South Africa, where farmers and the landless peoples movement, a group of Africans who are landless because the white farmers' ancestors took their ancestors' land. They were working together and had passed a moratorium in South Africa to prevent or delay Shell from fracking in South Africa. And Shell's one of the biggest companies in the world, right? And Enbridge is pretty powerful too. So hearing these stories, knowing that that First Nations campaign actually succeeded in blocking the Northern Gateway pipeline was really inspirational to me. And at the time, I was, I think, clerk of Earthquaker Action Team's board. We were feeling called soon after that to start a new campaign that involved racial justice in looking at where solar jobs would go in our area. And I was so curious, what are people learning about how to do this? What are people learning about what works? So it was really during the first Trump administration. I'm sorry to say that Trump is always good for my speaking calendar. I started doing a lot more public speaking, and I would just try and use that time to see what is happening in this area if I'm traveling. So one of the phrases I learned at Pendle Hill was way opening. And way opened in remarkable ways. I was invited to speak to Quakers in the gathering in New Mexico. And I thought, well, maybe I could stay a little extra time, learn about issues there. And I looked at the map and saw the Navajo Nation and thought, oh, I've always heard about issues there. So I mentioned to the Quakers I was speaking with in the planning, you know, do you know anything about issues on the Navajo Nation? And they said, oh, we live there, come stay with us. So I was like, okay. There were lots of stories like that behind the stories in the book. Another one was our partners in that Power Local Green Jobs campaign that Equate was doing. Our partners, Power Interfaith, got invited to speak on environmental justice panel in New Orleans. And they were all too busy and said, Eileen, would you like to go to New Orleans? And I said, yes, please. And from that, got invited to visit the Vietnamese community in New Orleans East, which I I had heard about because they succeeded in stopping toxic dumping after Hurricane Katrina. A lot of the refuse of New Orleans was going into their community. And although the elders in that community had fled war in Vietnam, were immigrants who are not always, eager to take on the government, right? Also culturally, protesting was a hard thing, but they really felt like if they didn't defend their community, they might lose their youth. They said the young people are going away to college, and are they going to come back, if we become a dumping ground? And so it's this amazing story of this intergenerational effort. They partnered with other local communities and were able to stop the dumping. So that was, almost 20 years ago. At the time I visited, they were on the front lines again with a gas plant scheduled for their community. And they had built this amazing coalition of people of many different races and many different cultures were showing up strategically, persistently, and yet the gas plant still got built. And when I met with them, they were really reflecting on what they had done well, what they had accomplished. They got some concessions from the company that had to invest $5 million in their community. They had gotten promises of pollution reduction because of their organizing. They had exposed the corruption of the New Orleans City Council that included several members who were taking money directly from the gas company. But they still had to live with the gas plant being built. And what I found in my travels is that many of the stories did end like that, along with ones that had a kind of happy, hey, they stopped the pipeline. And so an early draft I shared with George Lakey, and George, was very supportive of this project from the beginning and read it and said, oh, Eileen, you're such a great writer. This is such an important book. Too bad so many of your stories are so depressing. Thanks, George. But it was actually a really important piece of feedback because it made me think, I'm trying to follow spirit. What's up if spirit keeps bringing me to places that don't necessarily have a happy, easy story? What's that about? I really feel like it's part of getting ready for these times. Because the truth is, we have not been winning everything, right? We've been winning and losing. And we have a lot we can learn from both kinds of experiences. That story of the New Orleans gas plant is in a chapter called Love and Power, which is from that quote I mentioned that Michael taught me from Dr. King in 1967. 10 years into his organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, they were celebrating all they had accomplished in 10 years. But he said we also have to reckon with what we haven't accomplished in 10 years. And so this quote that feels so apt for these times also feels appropriate for the climate crisis, I think. He said that many religious people don't want to grapple with power. They think it's somehow anti-religious, and that's wrong, fuzzy philosophy. He says we have to grapple with power. He said, power without love is reckless and abusive. And love without power is sentimental and anemic. Which is exactly how I felt about a lot of peace vigils I've gone to, I have to say. I dragged my kids to all these things that didn't stop the invasion of Iraq and didn't have language for what was missing, but it was any attempt to thwart power. We were focused on expressing our displeasure, but not focused on really thinking about how to stop what was happening. And so Dr. King goes on, it's an amazing speech that also is turned into a book called Where Do We Go From Here? But that quote has really helped me in the many years since kind of think about about what's happening and what is my role. And Dr. King talks about building love and power, that we really need both in order to implement the demands of justice. And he says that power is just the ability to affect change. He gives the example of union, the auto workers union is able to get an auto company to do something they don't want to do through pressure. But he also has that building of pressure in this context of love as the final goal, like a beloved community. So how do we do both at the same time? So in the book, I share stories of people grappling with that, including Earthquaker Action Team, which is my activist home in this area. But also, I think it's what a lot of the groups I met with were up to. I think it's what the Vietnamese community was up to. They loved their community, they loved the land, they were aware that they bordered fragile ecosystem, and they were trying to build grassroots power through coalition building. And so what I noticed in the research is that there were different ways people tried to build power, and they did build some power, not enough, but they really did build enough to get concessions from a multi-billion-dollar company. And that was because of the strength of coalition they built. But they didn't make it so big and so huge that it might have overwhelmed, this company. And afterward, there was one member of the coalition who was an older Black guy who had been organizing for ages. And he said, I really thought we should have emphasized the economic angle, because this gas plant was going to hurt everybody. And maybe that would have brought in more of the white people. Which was a question I heard a lot in Louisiana, like, what in the world could get the white people to join? Because the communities of color were quicker to understand how this affected them. In another part of Louisiana, I tell a story of a community that actually built an amazing cross-racial coalition in the 70s and especially in the 80s. In the 80s, they could turn out 600 people to a hearing in Calcasieu Parish, which later became the subject of, I don't know how many people have heard of the book Strangers in Their Own Land, which is about white Republicans or white conservatives who fish and, have a value around environmental protection, but we're voting for the Tea Party, we're voting for conservative candidates. And when I interviewed these kind of elder activists about their successful campaign in the 80s, one of them said at the end, we could never do this today. And I said, why not? And they said, well, Ruth, who was one of the heroes of this story, would be a Trump supporter if she were alive today. And that the chasms that have opened up in our country left that region to be even more vulnerable to petrochemical plants. A huge facility was built in a community called Mossville that is right in the heart of that. And it became clear as I heard more layers of this story that industry had played a role in dividing people, right? There was one group in that area where industry, this probably happens more than we know, but this had actually been broken by the news, that industry had paid someone to become a spy on the board of a local environmental group and then say racist things to kind of blow up the coalition. Guess what? It worked. They blew up this coalition so that the next time industry wanted to expand, there wasn't a grassroots coalition to stop them. And that brings me back to this story of the book I found at Pendle Hill many years ago. As I was processing these stories, I remembered the profound effect this book had on me called Learning to Be White. People heard of this? Yeah. By Ten Denka. She is an African-American Unitarian Universalist minister. And I found that right at this moment after my mother died at the end of 2005. And while my mom was dying, this memory came up for me of the biggest fight we ever had was about racism. And I just felt this huge anger at my mom, who was on morphine, and talking about feelings was never her strong suit, but definitely like she is not going to help me process this. And out of it, I just felt this kind of leading to trying to understand more, like why would someone like my mother, who in many ways was a very smart and good person, have this ideology that I find so abhorrent, which really hurt our relationship. And so it was after that I was independent at a bookstore, and this book really talks about the immigrant experience, the deliberate attempts to pit immigrants against each other and against African Americans and Indigenous people. And it helped to kind of put my family's story in a different context. And but interestingly, as I felt led to start teaching classes on racism and do some more writing on racism, I didn't focus much on the white people. Which until I got to this book, I was like, oh God, we really gotta do some work with the white people. I mean, it's not, I was doing work with white people, but not focusing on how racism messed us up. Do you know what I mean? As a secondary effect, right? So in this book, I bring that in this chapter about the region where the environmental movement got divided. So I'll just read a tiny part of that where I talk about this book. And going back to it, I noticed, revisiting the book, I noticed that Tendenka describes the illusion of separation without using that exact phrase. She says, racial contempt would function as a wall between poor whites and blacks, protecting the enslavers and the wealth they amassed from both groups. This gave poor whites a largely illusory identification with the enslavers, which cost them psychologically, spiritually, and economically. End quote. As a result, Irish minstrels in the 19th century sang about terrible urban living conditions and protested the gross disparity of wealth between rich and poor, all while wearing blackface, which scapegoated Black people, their competition on the labor market, and also their potential allies. I came to realize that this is playing a huge role in helping the fossil fuel industry continue to build plants in Black and brown communities. This pitting of neighbors against each other. And it's very often the frontline leaders who are most able to see that this is an illusion. So just like I said, Zulene in Chester knows that that pollution is coming to Wallingford. I heard that again and again in places like Norco, Louisiana, where the people who live on the other side of the tree line, a white community, would say, no, we don't have any pollution here. They're living in between an oil refinery and a chemical plant. Like, they have the same asthma rates, right? It's often a working class white community, but it's just on the other side of the fence. And the communities that have been successful in stopping fossil fuel expansion in their neighborhoods are the ones who figure out how to talk about this and how to build alliance with their neighbors, and show that there's a common stake in stopping it. So one of the happy stories in the book is also Louisiana. They wanted, Formosa Chemical Plant wanted to build in a historically Black community in St. James Parish, just up the river from this community, Norco. And they did an amazing job of building a coalition up and down this area that's called Cancer Alley, bringing in all kinds of allies, getting national news, and basically thwarting the company from moving into their area. So there are happy stories in the book, but race is one of the dividing lines that was most hard to deal with and hard to see that this is having so many levels of impact, including in our electoral cycle, right? There have been more and more books, I think, realizing that people often vote against their own economic interests because of that illusory identification with the billionaires, right? Somehow identifying with the billionaires, So that's one of the themes of the book. Another is this question of power. And so part of power comes from elections, but a lot of power comes from money. And one of the other interesting experiences in Louisiana was going to the oil and gas industry meeting and hearing them talk among themselves. I put on my one pair of high heels and tried to look like I fit in, and realized that this illusion of separation has so many layers. They talked about nature as a place to go on vacation, and how one of their speakers, they said, was a great lover of the environment because he hunted and he fished. He was also the guy who was under Trump's first term was rolling back regulation on deep sea water drilling. And I was sitting there remembering what I had learned about the BP oil spill and the fact that pelican eggs in northern Minnesota, 80% of them a year later had oil from the Gulf, from the BP spill, oil or the chemicals they used to sink the oil. Now, it took me like a minute to figure this out. I'm kind of embarrassed how long it took me to understand that, but I'm like, who can articulate why would pelican eggs in Minnesota have BP oil in them? So
I'm guessing migration?
yes, the Mississippi River is like a major migratory path for birds. There's all kinds of wildlife moving this crap around. Another study I read said predicted that turtles would be carrying BP oil to the west coast of Africa. So this illusion that we're separate, that it stops at our border, is just not true. And then there's climate change. So this meeting was happening in a hotel that flooded during Hurricane Katrina, and yet nobody's talking about climate change. Even the guy who was complaining that deep sea drilling is getting harder because of sea level rise and more hurricanes. But they didn't seem to be connecting the dots. And so afterward, I had this really kind of spiritual struggle after hearing a bunch of these stories of meeting people in frontline communities. I had also set an intention to meet more workers and way open for that too. I had met a bunch of workers and found that I really could talk to them even if they didn't have the same politics as me, could understand. My dad worked on a Shell oil tanker. My great-grandfathers were coal miners. I can understand somebody wanting to have a job in that industry that pays better than a lot of other industries. But man, those people who were the executives, they really challenged my my Quaker beliefs. So I'm going to read one other part from there. I called Ingrid Lakey. Some of you know Ingrid from the New Orleans airport, and kind of ranted about this, and she said, I don't know the answer, but this feels important, and I think it is important to this moment. Anyway, so at the conference happy hour, I tried approaching a few women, but struggled to chit chat, even though I normally love engaging strangers. I believe that on a spiritual level, we are all part of a larger whole, but it felt like a thin fish line of connection, hard to see under the hotel chandeliers. Although I had gone to hear their side of the story, I couldn't stop the running critique in my head about how delusional they were. Did my Quaker belief that there was that of God in every person mean I had to see the divinity in them? I believed it did, but I wasn't sure how to do that. given that companies like Exxon were responsible for an unfathomable amount of harm. The human death toll from climate change could easily be in the hundreds of millions. I boiled down my dilemma to a challenging theological question. How do I love my neighbor when he is killing my other neighbors? Back home, I shared my Lamoga experience with the Quaker Support and Accountability Committee that meets with me regularly to help me stay in touch with Spirit's guidance for my work. Some of them are here tonight. One member said she could empathize with industry's feeling of victimhood, which I had pointed out with incredulity. It's true that people want to sue them, she said. It's true that people want them to pay more taxes, one of the recurring complaints at the conference. Put this way, by a woman of color who is quick to empathize with those hurt by industry, I could glimpse how executives felt beleaguered. From their worldview, they were just defending their profits, which was their obligation to their shareholders in a capitalist system. So then I go on this thought experiment of like trying to see, can I find any empathy for the head of Exxon or other people like that? And I did start to find some things they said that I could see from their point of view. It was humbling to acknowledge other ways I could relate to the Lamoga speakers, the Atlantic Oil and Gas Association. Not so long ago, I thought of the environment as a place to camp on vacation, rather than the air I breathed and the water I drank. Not so long ago, I was unaware that my daughter's asthma was likely caused by an oil refinery in a neighborhood only a few miles from our home. And not so long ago, I thought that choosing the green fund for my retirement account meant that I wasn't investing in fossil fuels, when in fact I was. It was easy to believe that I wasn't part of the problem, though of course that is part of the illusion of separation. So the lessons from this that feel relevant today, I do think there's part of us that needs to look at ourselves and what is our role in the system. I think sometimes Quakers can get a little too focused on that part. We also really have to think about how to build power. And the one connecting point I would offer is that that thing I said about Bill Tabor using different language that could speak to different kinds of people. I think activists have to get better at that. We sometimes spend so much time arguing between the people on the left and the almost left about what are the right words to use, rather than figuring out how to bring along someone who's persuadable. I'm not saying that we should spend all our energy trying to convince people verbally, but we have lost a lot of narrative battles by being kind of too stuck in our self-righteousness. Mm-hmm. And so there's something about that empathy, which AOC talks about, that trying to understand somebody else's point of view is not a sign of weakness. It's necessary if you believe that you have a vision you want to invite people into. And when I looked at the places where people actually beat a multi-billion-dollar company, it was often because they figured out how to do that. I also think we need more bold non-cooperation. We need more standing in the way of what's wrong, whether it's ICE or the pipeline company or people in their workplace saying, no, Elon Musk, you can't have our data. And frankly, there's been a lot of that, more that's in the news, more than is in the news, right? Do people know that term, non-cooperation? Of saying, no, we are just not going to go along with what you want us to do. There's a lot more of it happening now, and I think that's a hopeful thing, including people challenging institutions that are kind of being contested. I'm watching the clock. So I'll just tell a few more quick stories from the book and then open it up. one of the places where I felt like many of these lessons came together was in spending time with an Indigenous-led campaign on the front lines of Line 3. I don't know how many people have heard about Line 3. Have you heard of Standing Rock? Yeah. So Line 3 had a lot of similarity with Standing Rock, but it didn't get as much press. It was in northern Minnesota, and it was a pipeline that was built across several different Ojibwe nations. And so it didn't have one huge gathering the way Standing Rock did. There were a lot of smaller camps along the pipeline route, and people doing very brave direct action, chaining themselves to a bulldozer, or older women. I hear Winona LaDuke's coming to Swarthmore soon. Winona and some other women, basically chained themselves to lawn chairs, which was the over 60 version, I think. I was sent to a camp that I was later told was the prayer camp. And I had just gone wherever I was assigned. And so I didn't take part in that kind of action there, but got to witness this sort of spiritual grounding of this campaign. We had sweat lodges all the time, and it was just really interesting to be there and to experience how they talked about the work they were doing and the idea of relatedness or hiddenness, as Sharon said, talking about the police as our relations, the Enbridge workers were our relations, as well as the clams that were dying in the river because it was so hot that summer, right? And that language of relationship, I think, was part of them bringing in huge numbers of people from across the country. They had, I heard 1,000 people got arrested, and I don't know how many people showed up to make soup and things like that. So I'll just read one paragraph, I think, from that section of the last action I was part of there was organized by Indigenous youth who organized a prayer action on this river with singing and chanting and drumming. And this was just one of the most memorable parts for me. The message of interconnection was reinforced by the presence of our animal relatives at the action. An eagle flew high over the river before we began. An otter bobbed surprisingly close to the first raft as a turtle watched from a protruding rock. Of course, those are our clan animals, one Red Lake elder explained. I was not raised with a worldview that allowed for animals attending prayer protests. But as I waited between the otter and the turtle on my way to the Enbridge fence, I remembered Robin Wall Kimmerer saying that those of us moving toward the green path are aided by other living beings who want to live too. So that experience had a big effect on me, and it was only a few months after that that the campaign director of Equate got another job, and I was asked to step in as interim director. We were just starting a new campaign targeting Vanguard, the biggest investor in fossil fuels in the world. And as I started learning about this new campaign, it turned out that Vanguard was also the biggest investor in every company in this book, just about. Or the biggest or one of the biggest. So Entergy, who built the gas plant in New Orleans East, a Vanguard investment, Exxon, Enbridge, the pipeline company, Peabody Coal on the Navajo Nation, or Adani Coal in India. It was really remarkable how the threads came together. So another illusion that if you have money invested in the stock market, that you're separate from all this. It's all intertwined. So I kind of joked like either God knew I was going to work on the Vanguard campaign when I got sent all these places, or Vanguard is just that big, or both. And I kind of think it's both. But one of the great things about that campaign has been building connections with frontline communities, because I absolutely think we need to figure out how to have more cross-race, cross-class collaboration if we have any hope of, thwarting multi-billion-dollar companies. And so that's how we partnered with Eileen in Chester and walked from Chester waterfront to Vanguard headquarters in Malvern. And we've had people from a number of other communities come and have actions at Vanguard with Equate supporting to lift up those voices and make the connections between where our money is going. And pressure Vanguard, we have some interim demands right now. One of them is an Indigenous rights policy, because if the investment company asks the companies they're invested in just that much, just to treat fairly the Indigenous communities where they operate, that would be a game changer in many of these campaigns. So I think I'll pause there and see what I've been talking a lot. I would love to hear either what's on your heart or if there is a question. And we're going to have folks paying attention to Zoom. So I think you want people to put their question into Zoom, right? Into the chat for the in the Q&A. Okay, great, thanks. Let's just take a breath and see what really rises, because I know that was a lot. Go ahead.
I was wondering how, what kind of, how you went to, Indigenous communities or Black communities or other immigrant communities, with a campaign, for example, without the feeling of co-opting them into joining your campaign. Sort of.
Well, I never went trying to co-opt anybody into my campaign. I do think that it was a little different. So like line 3 had asked for allies to come. So that's one situation. They said, please come. And they had a system, and it seemed to be that they had recruited allies from like Minnesota 350 and groups like that to screen people who wanted to come. So I had to go to a webinar and watch a movie and have a conversation with somebody before they gave me the GPS coordinates of where to go. And they were the ones who decided who went to what camp. So with line 3, that was very clear. And there were people who came to camp who were then asked to leave if they felt they were not in alignment with what they were up to. The other places I was going more with my author hat on, and so it was almost always through relationship. So like I said, I was asked to speak on this panel in New Orleans, and then the person who was running the environmental justice panel said, hey, Eileen, we're taking a trip, why don't you come with us? There were a lot of times where somebody offered, like on the Navajo Nation, the Quakers who lived there were very well connected. They had lived there for a long time. So they introduced me to someone who introduced me to more people. But it definitely was a trust and feeling out. Just having conversation with people for them to say, is this someone who we want to pass on to our contacts? In the Navajo Nation in particular, there's been so much trauma, including dealing with nuclear waste, that people have told the same stories over and over. So I really tried not to ask people to tell a story again about, their kid who died, if it was in writing somewhere. Like I tried, I was obviously collecting stories for the book, but I was sensitive to the fact that there's a cost to people in both their time and their emotions, in telling some of it again. So there was a lot of kind of navigating in that way.
Did you track any patterns or commonalities or through lines around how people cross over to the other and extended or invited so that there could be a collective campaign?
I think one of the through lines was this thing of that, so there's a certain number of people who will show up to be an ally, like you have a problem and I'll be an ally, right? But so one of the Indigenous women I quote said, like, some people are here to be our ally, but some people recognize that it's their water too. That if they spill in the Mississippi River, which they did, 20 million people drink that water. So one of the chapters explores kind of different narrative choices and how people frame campaigns. But it does seem to me that you build a bigger campaign when you help people to find their own stake in it, And you could be both. Like, I wanted to support the Ojibwe, but I also believe that climate change is going to threaten my kids who live in Brooklyn, So that's my personal stake. They live in a place that floods a lot now. So I can hold both. And I think there's something about that helps bring in more people who are more committed, who don't just say like, oh, I'll go to a thing and then I'm not really in it when the police show up.
What you just said reminded me of John Powell talking about skin in the game. Johnny Powell. So I loved what you said about language. I'm often saying things like this. I'm hyper trained in critical theory, for instance, and like, so what? Like, we want to communicate.
Right.
When you talked about, I think it was Arlie Hochschild's book. Yeah. So when she did that, she got so slammed and slimed by people for having empathy for these white folks instead of beating them in her book for having their racism. So my work, so I have like books in the closet. This is a selfish question, in fact. And I got so, I don't like the overuse of this word, but I would say traumatized by my peers and allies, like needing this level of perfectionism. And like, if you have compassion for anyone except the designated victims or survivors, then you're being in denial. It's exhausting and it gets scary to speak and write. I'm sensing that you have, I guess it seems like maybe you get the support to stand in your truth and share it from your Quaker community, but I'm wondering if you have something to say, to speak to this.
Yeah, it's looking at my support committee, because I was much more worried about this a few years ago. So two things. I think I learned a lot from Arlie's book, and also she talks about white people mostly in isolation. So I made a different choice. I talk about both communities, and so in the section that looks at race, I start with a Black community and tell their story, and I use Ibram Kendi's definition of racism to kind of lay out what environmental racism is. And here's all the policies and here's all the ideas that make it the way it is, that make this disproportionately fall on this community. And then the next chapter is like, and wow, what's up with the white people who don't realize they live just next door? So that both are true at the same time. And what I heard in Louisiana, actually, I went to the HBCU climate conference, which was great. It was like 300 people through the historically Black colleges and universities. And their model is really centering Black communities and Black academics, supporting them with research and expertise and training, and they've made a huge difference in a lot of communities. And on the final day of the conference, one of the founders, Beverly Wright, Dr. Beverly Wright, who has written a lot, said, how do we get the white people? So like even in that context, they were grappling with this question, because if this is maybe the cancelable thought of the night, like if what you're really up to as a white person is posting on Facebook and showing how woke you are, you're not actually going to reach a new constituency, right? And what's become clear to me is that what I want to be up to is actually making a difference, and that matters to me more than getting more Facebook likes. And that partly came from Neona Span, who loves Venn diagrams. Because of something that was said in one of her programs, I have this Venn diagram for myself. And one circle is things that make me look like a good white person. And the other circle is things that I think help fight racism. There's some overlap, but they're not the same circle, right? So I think it's important to understand why focusing too much on white people drives people of color crazy. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to go that way, but we have to engage both. And I feel like there is more openness to grappling with that since this election, because clearly losing elections is not helping any of the issues that we care about, you know. So there's some grappling to do, and it's not just about race, I think, but race is clearly one of the ways we've gotten divided, and there's work to do to be able to speak to all the people who are about to lose their SNAP benefits, you know, and maybe break down the illusion that you're separate from other people who are getting SNAP benefits, right? Like, so I think we're at a moment where, like, not to I want to be really clear. Did people see that debate between, not debate, it wasn't supposed to be a debate, that conversation between Ezra Klein and Ta-Nehisi Coates? People know what I'm talking about. Right, like we have to understand that these Coates was saying, for people who don't know what we're talking about, there was a podcast conversation after Charlie Kirk's death, where Ta-Nehisi Coates was frustrated with what Ezra Klein said that sounded too conciliatory to the right wing, right? And I completely agree with Coates that we're not talking about being conciliatory to the right wing. We have to understand that racism and other forms of oppression have such deep, long histories in this country that this is not new. And for people who think it's new, you know, maybe read some more history books. The thing that Klein was saying that I appreciated was that it is a moment for Democrats to reflect on what we're doing wrong. I think that's a legitimate question. He wasn't really hearing the answer. That's what was frustrating about listening to it. But I think it's legitimate to say, what should we be doing differently? And what should we be careful about not compromising on? I think, anyway, that was a long response here.
A little over a year ago, I heard an NPR report about, I think it was the Peabody poll on the Navajo Nation, and they were doing demolition finally after all these years of the old coal stacks. And it was an NPR thing, which I only catch when I'm in the car, so I never get the complete story of anything. But they had interviews with people who had been struggling for years and years and years because of the negative health impacts of the coal burning. And they were so excited and happy and to witness this finally, you know, so it's the fruit of all their effort. And because it was a big event, I think, everybody came out to watch this. And then they had an interview with somebody who was on the other side, who was Navajo. And I was really very, curious at first, and then I really felt her compassion and her disappointment that it had come down in this way, because the way she explained it, which I only have this snippet to understand because I haven't researched it, but she said that back in the day, everybody worked at the coal plant. That was a major source of income for the entire community. And as two things factored in, more technology, so there were fewer jobs involved. But then there was also the cutting back on coal in response to environmental concerns.
Yeah.
And she was one of the last employees who was still in this position, but so the income had been reduced. But
So can I jump in?
Yes.
Okay. No, I'm just watching the clock.
Oh, okay. Just that her income
Yes.
had been the income of a number of people.
Yes.
And she felt responsible for her entire community and
Yes.
their sustenance.
Okay.
And
let me jump in.
Yeah.
This is one of the stories in the book.
Okay.
So the first thing to ground the real back in the day, the back in the way day, people lived off the land.
Yeah.
And one of the aspects of environmental injustice that I didn't really get until doing this research was how much polluting facilities have made it hard for people to survive without jobs in the economy that is polluting their land. Right? And in the Navajo Nation, in Ojibwe territory, in Louisiana, it was very often people in frontline communities who were used to sustaining themselves from the land who saw pollution first, right? So in Louisiana, there was this community with the successful dump site. They discovered it because people's chickens started dying and their lettuce started wilting. So it is absolutely true that when fossil fuel jobs disappear, people are scared and bereft. And it's just important to say that the system made them that way. The Navajo had plenty to eat before colonialism, right? Just for reframing. The coal plants on the Navajo Nation were kind of greenlit by the Sierra Club. There's some kind of nasty history there about that community getting sold out, but it did become such a mainstay of the economy and financing the Navajo Nation government. So I did talk to somebody in the Navajo Nation government who was trying to protect coal jobs, which were funding her job as well as the coal workers. The beautiful thing in the Navajo Nation was that some of the young activists who their dividing line was Hopi versus Navajo, or Dene, are two groups who have been pitted against each other by colonialism. And so they formed this organization called the Blackwater Mesa Coalition, bringing Hopi and Navajo or Dene youth together to work to protect their water, which was greatly compromised or poisoned basically by the coal operations. They foresaw that if they ever won in closing both of the major coal plants, people would need jobs. So after they closed the first one, they started working on solar and developing solar. So there's a beautiful story of a group called Native Generation, maybe, something like that, where they are providing electricity to people who never had electricity before, providing jobs for people who live on the reservation, and doing it in a way that's not destroying ecosystems because they're small solar projects, so they're not like chopping down farmland or anything. And so they're an example that I use of the holistic thinking that we need that it's not just jobs versus the environment, which is how it's getting cast down the road in Chester, where people are trying to push for an LNG plant now. So rather than buying into the framing of jobs versus, clean air or clean water, how can we devise systems that actually meet people's needs and recognize that people do need to feed their families and that the water's been poisoned by Peabody coal, right? So it is one of the tragic things right now that there were a lot of projects that are getting their funding cut because of the new administration. But one of the women who was one of the leaders of the Black Mesa Water Coalition was hired by Joe Biden to support Indigenous solar expansion. So there was a lot of work done over the last several years, but it's not solved. Like, I'm sure they've still lost more jobs than they've gained. But I think the last thing I'll say, and then I want to turn it back to Retta in a second, or maybe one more quick question, and then Dr. Retta. Oh, I forgot about Zoom. I'm so sorry. Where does the time go? The last thing to say is that I do sometimes hear people talk about like there really is something deep wisdom in Indigenous cultures that we need to learn from, and that's not the same as kind of assuming that all Indigenous people are alike and that they all are against the coal plant, right? Which was really clear on the Navajo Nation. Whatever stereotypes I had were broken up by exactly these dynamics. So I just want to name that as something important to hold. Is there anything from Zoom? Sorry.
That's okay. I also wanted to uplift two quick comments. One is that Neo Newspan is on the Zoom and sends gratitude.
Oh, thank you, Neo.
And another person says, I appreciate how you approach diverse communities with the expectation that you would learn something rather than that you would leave something. And then one question perhaps you could speak to a little bit more. This person says, all of what you have offered is of interest. I'm particularly curious to have you elaborate on how Quakers need to and can build up their power muscles.
Their power muscles. Well, Earthquaker Action Team is open for business. I think training is a great place for Quakers to start. And I've been noticing as I travel that a lot of Quakers are trying to figure out how to be useful. And many of us own these great buildings. And I've found a number of places using their buildings to invite other groups to do some kind of nonviolence training. And I want to shout out to Chris Moore and Friends Center here, who decided to celebrate their 50th anniversary by, instead of having some gala, by hosting trainings. And I think that is one of many things that Quakers can do during this time, is use our tradition of nonviolence and our property to be a place where people can come together and build up our skills. Michael, is your thing really fast?
If it's answered in the book, feel free to just say read
Okay.
the book, but I wonder if you could share a little bit about your highest hopes for this book.
Oh, my highest hopes. My prayer is that it be well used, and I don't know what that means. I think I've gotten so that I trust spirit more. Like, it might be some part of the book that I don't think is the most important part that helps people the most. I don't know. I just try to be faithful to tell the stories that people trusted me with. So thanks. We're gonna end with another song.
So this song, I'm
Do you
hoping,
want my
maybe I should
Okay.
use that better. This song I want to elicit your participation earlier on, so we'll learn it together. It's a beautiful song, We Rise, written by Dr. Levine. And if some of you know it, you can kind of help with the singing of it. I do want to mention the song I sang earlier. I believe in Being Ready, Rising Appalachia has a version of that I listened to. but it is old Southern gospel song. So boy, it's gone through many different iterations as lots of folk music does. I don't know that it actually has an author. It's authored by community. But this song has an author. And so I want to teach or sing the chorus of the song that is it's repetitive enough that I think we can learn it together. And there's a piece of the second part, which will be easier to sing than to talk about, I think. But there's two places in the song which I think we can sing. And then there are a lot of verses. And I think for folks who know the song, maybe can sing the verses with me. And I think the group can be the chorus 1, chorus 2 kind of thing. Okay, so the chorus, I'm gonna say the words first. In hope and prayer, we find ourselves here. Did you say that?
In hope and prayer, we find ourselves here.
So, and that's repeated, and the second line is a little different. In hope and prayer, we're right here.
In hope and prayer, we're right here.
So let's say those two lines together. In
hope and prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope and prayer, we're right here.
It sounds like this. In hope and prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope and prayer, we're right here. You want to try it?
In hope and prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope and prayer, we're right here.
And that we find ourselves, here's a little bit lazy on the rhythm there. We find ourselves here. Let me get it. In hope
In prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope and prayer, we're right here. In hope and prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope and prayer, we're right here.
Just one piece, the other part for us to sing together is we rise. There's 3 notes. And
We rise.
Last one's gonna be different. Gonna do this. Rise. So 3 like the first one and 1 different. Let's do those 4. We rise. Sing it again. We rise. And we sing it again. We rise. Now we sing it differently. We Actually, you could do that. It's almost like a harmony to it. So you could go.
Yeah.
I'll take the blip back. You absolutely can do that. Okay. So those are the 2 parts. So we're gonna start off with that in hope, in prayer, and go right to we rise. And I'm gonna sing some. And those who know will sing the verses in between. All right. I don't know if that makes sense, but it will hopefully when we sing it. Here we go. In hope,
In prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope and prayer, we're right here. In hope and prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope and prayer, we're right here.
we rise.
We rise.
Humbly hard.
We rise.
We won't be divided.
We rise.
With spirit to guide
We
us.
rise.
Hope and children rise. Elders with wisdom we rise. Ancestors surround we rise. In hope and prayer we find ourselves here. In hope and prayer we're right here. In hope and prayer we find ourselves here. In hope and prayer we're right here. We rise up from the rank. We rise in tears and with courage. We rise. We're building for life. We rise in hope and prayer. We find ourselves in hope and prayer. We're right here. In hope and prayer. We find ourselves here. In hope and prayer. We're right here. We hope and prayer. We find ourselves here. In hope and prayer. We're right here. In hope and prayer. We find ourselves here. In hope and prayer. We're right here.
Beautiful. Thank you everyone for coming. Do you have a final?
Yes, we have Eileen's newsletter. It's here,
Approximately monthly.
practically monthly. It'll be on the table, and I'll open the book. So if you didn't get Eileen's book, you can come get it now. And she has her special pen to sign.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.